Welcome, everyone. This is the second part of the four-part series between Player Profiler and the 33rd team. Last week, Ryan Reynolds and myself, Josh Larky, were on with Theo Greminger of Player Profiler. We broke down the rookie and second-year quarterback landscape. Today, we are back with Billy Muzio, Director of Operations at Player Profiler, one of the industry's most accurate experts when it comes to ranking players according to Fantasy Pros. We are going to be diving in to rookie running backs today. We've got 10 of them on deck. We'll talk about what we've seen from them so far, film-wise, and then talk about some statistical player comps for both redraft and dynasty. It should be short, it should be actionable, quick hitting, and I think everyone out there is going to learn quite a few things about this rookie running back class. Without further ado, Ryan, why don't you kick us off with our first running back?
Let's just jump right into the biggest name on the plate here, guys. Bijan Robinson, 8th overall pick out of Texas, 5'11", 215 pounds. Fluid athlete with a very well-rounded game. His ability to stack cuts is my favorite thing about him as a player. Unfortunately, Billy, Bijan's fate is in the hands of a madman in Arthur Smith. We can't really count on his role. We can't really count on his usage. What do you got on Bijan Robinson, Billy?
Yeah, I think, it definitely passes the eye test. We know that. We knew it coming out of college. It just breaks down right now to utilization and how he's being deployed inside of this offense, or I should say lack of deployment inside of this offense. It's snaps range anywhere from 60 to 80% on any given week. The rushing attempts are kind of floating in that 50% range. A season high is 67% of the rushing share. Routes has been the most consistent of the statistics outside of week 7, where we all know just randomly just kind of was disappeared. But he's been kind of floating around that 70% route range. And targets, though, the last few weeks have been a bit concerning. And so we kind of saw him beginning of the year, like week 1, when he came out the gate at like a 35% target share. I immediately said, I regret my decision where I had him ranked, because if he was going to see that type of target share, he had the ability to be the RB1 overall. And it quickly tapered off to like the high teens, the 16, 17% range, pretty steadily through week 4. And then the last couple of weeks, though, 7% week 8, 0% in week 7. And so got to be a little bit concerned with Arthur Smith and his ability to coach and start his studs per se. Right. And but from a film standpoint, we got to like the cuts, his ability to make a defender miss, he's hard to bring down in open space. And so like him, he's the package deal. I just want to see him on the field more.
That's Player Profiler's Billy Muzio. You can follow him at FF Muzio on Twitter. Josh, what do you got on Bijan Robinson?
Yeah, so Bijan Robinson, if we just take out that week 7 headache game, he's at nearly 16 fantasy points per game as a low-end fantasy 1 for a rookie. That's good. We like low-end fantasy RB1s as rookies. We just don't like that the Falcons invested the 8th overall pick in him, and that we were all drafting him for the most part in round 1 of fantasy drafts if you wanted to get him. But I think this is the kind of player that you do want to trade for in redraft and dynasty. Ryan, we actually recorded a show this morning and we talked about his playoff schedule. He gets Carolina, the Colts, the Bears. They're all top 7 matchups for fantasy points allowed to running backs. And we know that obviously that's great for redraft, but we also know in dynasty, value gets heightened when guys end the season on good stretches. And when I was trying to think about some kind of player comp for dynasty value, sort of what to expect touches wise, I just kept coming back to a player we saw last year in Breece Hall. Breece Hall was eased in as a rookie. He wasn't really getting the full workload. Some weeks you'd be like, wow, this guy looks really good on the ground. Other weeks you'd have a little target share spike, and you kind of knew that he was the best running back out there at whatever he did. It was more just, what are the Jets going to give him this week? And then in year 2, we've seen Breece Hall, once the ACL was fully healthy, now he is just an absolute bell cow, getting all the high value touches in year 2, where really the only thing holding him back at this point is Zach Wilson. Bijan's actually a little bit ahead of Breece Hall, and that's why I still think he should stay ahead of him in dynasty, and I think why we should all be really, really bullish. Ultimately, if we take out that week 7 game, Bijan Robinson's averaging nearly 17 touches per game. So while I think all the rushing share numbers kind of show that Arthur Smith has truly split this backfield, because of how run heavy this team is, you're still getting nearly 17 touches a game, with nearly 4 of those touches per game coming through the pass game on the season. So I think Bijan still looks like the Dynasty RB1. I'm not concerned there. And I think for me, redraft and Dynasty, he's a big trade target.
That's Jaleel Larky tweets. And please, dear Atlanta Falcons, if you're going to take 3 blue chip skill position players in the top 10, start using them accordingly. Next up, gentlemen, Jahmyr Gibbs, Detroit Lions, 12th overall pick out of Alabama. 5'9", 200 pounds, so workload's been a bit of a concern from his size. Explosive player. I think a fair comp is Alvin Kamara with more speed. He's coming off his 2 best games as a pro. Billy, what's your outlook on Jahmyr Gibbs?
I like the comp. I see a lot of resemblance to Jamal Charles as well when I watch the tape.
Yep.
Love his fluidity, his speed, his ability to just create damage in open space as well. If he gets that corner, forget about it. We saw it last week as well. But this was actually, when I was watching film on these rookies, this was actually a player who I liked more than Bijan from an eye test standpoint. He looked like the complete package. I liked the speed. I liked the hands. I liked his metrics from college as well. As he had a 93rd percentile college target share. When I saw Detroit take him, I mean, I assumed they were going to use him a little bit more than what they have been. Although we got to follow the money with contracts typically. So we did know that David Montgomery was going to get work. That being said, Gibbs has a bright future ahead of him. We're going to continue to see him get more involved. We finally saw it the last couple of weeks with Montgomery shelved, but I'm really excited about Jahmyr Gibbs and his future in this backfield. And it's one of my largest targets inside Dynasty if I don't currently own him.
PlayerProfiler's all-in package will be $10 on Thanksgiving only. That's the deepest discount they've ever had. Be sure to check that out when the time comes. Josh, as you know, we were drafting best ball teams in February. Our big board exposure on Jahmyr Gibbs is extraordinarily high. Where are you at on Gibbs now?
So I think Billy and I might actually see this a little bit differently. I love Jahmyr Gibbs in Dynasty too, but I actually think the time to trade for him will be when the season ends. I think this year, David Montgomery, whenever he's healthy, is going to be more of the lead back. It's kind of what we've seen. I think Gibbs, out of necessity, was the lead back these past 2 weeks because Montgomery was out. The way that I'm actually seeing this is week 7, we have the dream game script. The dream scenario for Gibbs, Montgomery's out. They're down 28-0 at halftime to the Ravens. Probably the only time all year the Lions are going to have that type of game script, given how good their defense and offense have been. You get 10 targets, Gibbs catches 9 of them. Then week 8, Monday Night Football, Gibbs faces a Raiders team that just cleaned house after the game. Couldn't have been a better 2-game stretch in fantasy. Couldn't have been a better 2-game stretch, I think, as well in terms of game script and opponents. So the way that I'm seeing Gibbs is that I think he can definitely have like that Alvin Kamara type career where year after year, you're like, wow, this guy's just so efficient. And he's always kind of in that fantasy RB1 range somewhere year after year. And then he's not getting too many touches. So he kind of has the career longevity. I just think this year it's more of the David Montgomery show. And I know Montgomery's there next year and maybe for a 3rd season as well, depending on how year 2 goes. But I really view this as Montgomery's year and Gibbs as the change of pace guy. And then next year is when I think the roles flip. And you might say, well, Josh, his dynasty value is going to go up after the season. Yeah, I agree. I just think that right now, this isn't a player I'd want to buy high on when I think his production is actually going to be lower for the rest of this season specifically.
Next up, Miami Dolphins running back Devin Achane. 3rd round pick, 84th overall out of Texas A&M. 5'9", 188 pounds. Been explosive. Ran for a staggering 455 yards in his last 3 games. He's averaging 12 yards per carry on his 38 runs. You couldn't accomplish this in a video game. He's been sidelined. He's been sidelined with a knee injury, Billy, for a little while now. Obviously, no one could have expected more out of him early in the year. What are you thinking about him going forward?
Oh God, I love this kid. It's just like Chris Johnson reborn. It's he's so fast. The 4.32 speed. When you're watching tape, he was so quick compared to everyone else on the field. It was evident that he was going to be explosive in the NFL. The only thing I think that kind of hindered his draft was his size, because when he did get the ball, he's just lightning fast. And so I love the tape. You can't help but love all the metrics that you just read off. I mean, it's literally impossible to accomplish in a video game. And so apparently it can only happen with him on the Miami Dolphins. That's the only place in the world it can occur. But I think when healthy, and this is going to be the statement I think we're going to make with his career. When healthy, Devon Achane is probably every week considerable the RB1. That being said, the size, the weight, everything about his size is going to probably hinder his career in terms of health. Because you're running that quick and you're taking hits at that size, it's probably not going to bode well for his healthy season. So love him, but I do have concerns long term.
That's Billy Muzio. Follow him at FF Muzio on Twitter. Josh, I think Billy makes a great point. Mike McDaniel's offense is probably the only place this happens with Devon Achane. Great athlete, obviously, a lot of credit to him. What are you thinking about him short term? Because the Dolphins were a contender this year and going forward.
So what I like is that prior to his injury, within about 1 week, as the committee back with Mostert, McDaniel said, this guy's better. And what we saw, though, those next 2 games prior to injury was that Achane was really taking over not just more of the rushing workload, more of the routes, but a lot more of the red zone and the goal line work too. It's not like Mostert's a big back or anything like that, but you just have general concerns of, I'm not quite sure which guy's going to get it. It really seemed like they wanted Achane in for all the high-value touches in the run game and all the high-value touches in the pass game. That's really what I like. I'm with Billy. I have a lot of concerns rest of career with the injuries. I think you said it well, Billy. Like any week that he plays, he's in conversation for RB1 overall. But if you were to kind of predict total fantasy points for a given season, he'd probably end up being at like RB15 because of the injury concerns. However, for Dynasty, the way that I'm kind of treating him is that I think we should expect an Eckler or Kamara type career path in terms of if he's on our team. I wouldn't want to trade a player like this away because again, we've only seen one real NFL injury. I know he was injured in the preseason. I don't worry too much about that because rookies still sort of have like some of their college routine built in. I'm not too concerned with like, before he was in the NFL. So for me, I'm treating him as if he kind of has one NFL injury. This is probably the start of more things to come. But at the same time, I think what we've seen when you have 12 yards per carry, when the guy was giving you 33 fantasy points a game his last 3 weeks, I simply wouldn't be trading him away. And I think if you're trading for him, he works best in a deep running back room where you're kind of assuming you have a top 3 running back when he's healthy. And when he's not healthy, that you have contingency plans in Dynasty to kind of keep that juggernaut going.
Next up, Seahawks running back Zach Charbonnet, 2nd-round pick, 52nd overall out of UCLA, 6'1", 214 pounds. So he's a big back, well-rounded game. Unfortunately, he's stuck with Kenneth Walker and what's going to end up being some kind of timeshare over the next several years. I'm curious, Billy, what are you thinking about this Seahawks backfield and Charbonnet in particular?
I think this backfield is going to be continue to be dominated by Kenneth Walker. To me, he's the superior talent. He has a stranglehold in the position. I know the last week with the injury, he was limited, and we got to see a little bit more. Zach Charbonnet, for the first time in his career, NFL career, in 8 weeks, he saw 56% of the snaps. It's the first time above 50%. He saw 31% of the rushing attempts, which is the first time he's eclipsed the 30% mark as well. I'm going to be honest. I was not a Zach Charbonnet fan coming into the season. He had the skill set to succeed and be a 3-down back. I just didn't like what I saw on tape. He ran upright, and I just don't like that from a running back perspective. He had a little DeMarco Murray to him, but I don't think he's ever going to hit that mark, quite frankly. And I do think he's going to be limited based upon playing behind Kenneth Walker, at least through the early part of his career. I do think he's bound to probably get more involved as we progress through the season and into next year, but it's hard to keep Kenneth Walker off the field when he has been as efficient as he has. And I just think that he's the better back. And so I am not really leaning into Zach Charbonnet for the rest of the season or in Dynasty. I don't own him anywhere because of what I saw in film, but if I did, I'd be looking to sell probably.
I love the DeMarco Murray comp because for whatever reason, he's one of the guys that a lot of players fall into the DeMarco Murray bucket for me. Yeah. And I agree with you completely. Bigger back, solid, but not exactly spectacular. Josh, you're a Charbonnet guy. You like the draft capital. You like the situation. Where are you at on Charbonnet now, Josh?
Yeah, so I liked him a lot more in redraft than Dynasty, and I think that still is holding for me. ultimately he looks like one of the premier handcuff running backs where should Kenneth Walker go out, I think Charbonnet outproduces Kenneth Walker in the fantasy points department because of the receiving work, because he'd also get the goal line work, and because whoever they have as the next back end, whether it's McIntosh, DJ Dallas, that next guy would be so much worse than Kenneth Walker that I think Charbonnet is getting all the touches. That being said, not super excited in Dynasty, because after this year, he will still have 2 more years with Kenneth Walker. I was trying to think about dual running backs where they're both fantasy relevant, but the offense isn't awesome. Because I think our hope for the Seahawks was maybe Geno is what he was last year. Maybe he even takes a step forward in year 2 as the starter. We haven't really seen that. And for some reason, the first thing I thought of was these last few weeks of A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones, where it's a Packers offense we're not crazy about. They're splitting touches pretty down the middle, and you just can't start either. This is the better version of that, but I think that's kind of the problem, is that if we see more weeks like last week where they're getting similar snaps, similar carries, a little bit more rushing for Walker, a little more pass catching for Charbonnet, that unless the offense is truly elite, you're going to have trouble there. And you might say, well, what about a non-elite offense that runs through that flows through running backs? Like, yes, we saw that last year with the Lions, where you have an offense that doesn't have as many elite pass catchers, and then you go, oh, there can be weeks with 2 running backs getting there in fantasy. No, I mean, no backfield had more PPR fantasy points a game than the Lions last year, but that wasn't actually the NFL's best offense. It was just that whenever Swift was on the field, he was pretty efficient, and then Jamal Williams got all the touchdowns. Issue here, dynasty-wise, is that DK Metcalf's there long-term. When you look at Tyler Lockett's contract, they actually can't get out of it. Not that they'd want to either. He's been awesome. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba, that guy is not going anywhere. So if you have a non-elite offense with 3 really, really talented receivers and another talented running back there, then at this point, I haven't seen anything to think that Charbonnet is going to overtake Walker. And right now, I'm not particularly interested in either in Dynasty. And then I'd say in redraft, at cost, I'd lean Charbonnet just purely because the handcuff upside, but I wouldn't say that I have a super strong stance against Walker necessarily at this point. So yeah, Charbonnet, ultimately, I think this could have been a more disappointing landing spot now that we've seen 8 weeks of action.
As J. Larky tweets, his rest of season rankings and trade calculator are up on the site right now. Visit the 33rdteam.com. All of our content is free this year. Next up, gentlemen, Roschon Johnson, round 4 pick, 115th overall out of Texas, 6'2", 223 pounds, so a bigger back. He played behind Bijan Robinson in college. When watching film this offseason, I remember a specific play where he caught a pass in the flat, and I actually thought he was Bijan Robinson until after the play where I saw his number. So I don't think they're equivalent talents, but I do think he's also a fluid athlete that's good, like has a well-rounded game. That said, Chicago's landing spot is a bit of a double-edged sword, at least in the short term. I would have wanted him to go to a team with a pocket passer because I think his best upside is as a pass catcher, where with Justin Fields, mobile quarterback, we see less volume in the passing game in general. Where are you at on Roschon, Billy?
This is a back I actually liked coming out of college, and it wasn't because I thought he was the fastest. I mean, I think he lacks burst. He definitely lacks juice to get around and get chunk runs, but he was just super consistent in his play. And the thing I was really high on him coming into the league this year was because he was very capable in pass protection. And that was a weakness for the Chicago Bears last season with Khalil Herbert, who was, one of the worst graded pass protection blockers at the running back position. And we all know that Donta Foreman is non-existent in the passing game as well. So I knew that he was going to carve out a role in the passing game. And that's something that we have seen here so far early in his career, where he has seen, 10, 11, 9% of the target share on a week-to-week basis. Week 1, he saw 21%. It would have been nice if that continued, but here we are. The concussion definitely put a damper on things, and Foreman took advantage of the situation. And so I think that's also going to hinder the breakout for Roschon Johnson. That being said, I think he's got a pretty consistent role here as the third down back inside of this offense. And if he can start getting more involved on the 1-2 downs and capturing more of that rush attempt percentage, if he can get closer to 30%, I think we are looking at an every week, high-end RB3 in a fantasy perspective, and has a role carved out for his NFL career.
Josh, I know you've liked Roschon as a stash. Does that stance continue?
Yeah, I'd say the stance continues. First, I'll mention we have a massive tier break right now going from Charbonnet to Roschon, just in terms of redraft dynasty value, kind of everything, draft capital across the board. We are now having a considerable drop off. So I think we need to frame stuff around what Roschon's value is right now. Roschon, when you look at the rushing, he's actually been the worst rusher in this Bears backfield this year by nearly every advanced metric. But he's been the best overall receiving back for Chicago, kind of like what Billy was saying. This is, I think one of the reasons we were all kind of in on him this year is that at the very least, even with the weak round 4 draft capital, it seemed like he had a pretty clear and obvious path to at least getting on the field for third downs and receiving work. The reason that I'm bullish rest of season is because we've still seen the Bears just rotating a lot of backs. And if they were going to stop at 1, I think Roschon has a decent chance for it, given he's pretty inexpensive to acquire. Dynasty, what I like is that there's so much draft capital with Chicago. They have their first round pick next year. They have the Panthers' first round pick next year. He might have a massive quarterback upgrade next year. And I think if he doesn't get the quarterback upgrade, it's because Fields looks pretty good rest of season and simply wills Chicago into a pick that they can't quite turn into a quarterback. I will say, though, I think Roschon's the first player we've talked about where his role potentially does decrease next year compared to this year. I don't think he's safe from them drafting a running back, but I think in terms of what I'd predict for like how his career might go fantasy points wise, I think the upside would be Rachaad White, where people are like, oh, like Rachaad White was like fine as a rookie, not super exciting. We don't necessarily love this team. And then they just don't really draft a running back. And all of a sudden, Rachaad White's the guy, and he's been great for fantasy football. And you go, oh, I've got a fantasy RB2, and he was pretty inexpensive. I think that's actually a real possibility for Roschon. I think the downside is that you're getting what we've seen recently from Antonio Gibson, where the fantasy managers out there always want to will him more touches, and the coaching staff simply doesn't, because you cannot start Antonio Gibson this year in really any week and have any kind of high expectations. But he's also just good enough that you're not really dropping him from a redraft dynasty team. So that's kind of my fear, is that I think high-end Rachaad White, low-end purgatory player.
Next up, Titans running back Tyjae Spears, 3rd-round pick, 81st overall out of Tulane. 5'10", 200 pounds. So again, size is a little bit of a concern here. When we had Mike Tannenbaum on the show this summer, Josh, I'm a Tyjae Spears guy. Mike's a Tyjae Spears guy. Fast, explosive. He's been impressive so far in supplemental work. What do you think about Spears short term and long term, Billy?
This was another one I was really high on coming into the season. Just watching tape, it's just explosive player. I mean, averaged nearly 7 yards a carry in college. Touchdown machine in college. Very smooth and change of direction. The bogus report about his knee this offseason was awesome for a fantasy perspective, because it lowered his price, and we knew that he was going to carve out a role pretty immediately here in this Tennessee Titans offense as a pass catcher. And I know he wasn't a massive pass catcher in college, but usually college, we see this on multiple levels where they just don't throw to the running back in college. And then once the player gets to the NFL, they have the ability to catch the ball, and they're just deployed a little bit differently once they get to the NFL. So I expected this from Tyjae in the projections and in the model. He was built this way. I actually was expecting him to get a little bit more on the early down work. He is seeing some, and we've seen upwards of 33% rush share on some given weeks, but usually in that 25% range. I'd like to see him closer to 30% week in, week out. It's kind of hard to take away touches from King Henry when he's still being efficient, even at this age and point in his career. But I like Tyjae Spears' outlook for Dynasty. I think he's going to be a great running back as this team kind of finds its way and Derrick Henry continues to fade out. And I do think that he's going to have everyday flex value appeal with his ability to catch the ball and consistent targets inside the passing game.
Player Profiler's ranking package is currently $20. Billy was number 4 in Fantasy Pros rankings last year. He was first in 2021. Make sure you check out his rankings on PlayerProfiler.com. Josh, Tyjae Spears. Let me put it this way to you, Josh. We've seen Travis Kelce destroy the age model in Kansas City for tight ends. It doesn't matter how old he is. He just keeps massive producer. Taylor Swift, Josh. Derrick Henry, the big dog, he's not quite in that area yet, but he's starting to defy the age model as well. Does that create a problem with Tyjae Spears long term, or do you think Spears takes his backfield over next year?
I think Henry's not there after this year. I think Spears at this point is pretty much purely a dynasty play. You really need a Henry injury for him this year, but I think even with a Henry injury, I'm actually not quite sure if we're super excited about Spears. Part of why Henry's been fantasy relevant is he's getting 20 carries. I don't know if Spears is going to be getting that. It's a bad offensive line, bad offensive environment in general. So I think you're looking at like a low-end fantasy RB2 if Henry were to go down. Dynasty, I'm more optimistic. I think Henry's not there after this year. I do think the Titans draft a running back, but I think we've seen enough from Spears that at the very least, unless for some reason they just draft a guy in the first or second round, which I think they have too many holes to consider that. I think Spears gets the opportunity to at least be the 1A, if not the workhorse next year. That's why I'm pretty optimistic in Dynasty, is because I really think this is his backfield next year. He's had more yards before contact, more yards after contact this year than Derrick Henry, forcing more missed tackles and breaking tackles at a higher rate per touch than Derrick Henry this year. Obviously, Henry's gotten more touches, so it's harder to be as efficient per touch when you get more touches. But at the very least, Spears has shown that he has elite efficiency metrics at times per touch, which is what we want. I'm thinking in terms of a high-end comp, I think James Cook this year, where year one for James Cook was disappointing in terms of you couldn't start him in fantasy, but we saw some flashes when it's like, oh, like this could be the back of the future. And then sure enough, the Bills kind of did everything possible to make sure James Cook had the opportunity to get first crack this year in his second season. I think that's probably what we're getting from Spears. And I think that's kind of like the high-end outcome, is that you're getting like some of that James Cook early season efficiency from him. I think the lower end dynasty comp would just be him, that Tyjae Spears just looks like this year after year, and that we keep seeing him as kind of like, oh, he's so efficient per touch. Well, they give him more touches, and the team says, no, he's 200 pounds. He's been very great for us, and he's going to stay in this exact role.
I think Bigsby, gentlemen, I'm going to remind you that he's on the Jaguars because he hasn't done a whole lot this year. 3rd round pick, 88th overall out of Auburn, 6 foot, 213 pounds, good size. I was below consensus on him. I remember in my document that I keep when I'm watching film on all these guys, I wrote standard NFL running back, basically Alexander Madison. Reminder, Josh hates Alexander Madison, so he probably hated Tank Bigsby as well. Billy.
Yes.
I think we all thought that Travis Etienne was a guy here, explosive player, but I think Bigsby, he has a chance for role expansion over the next few years. What do you think about him in Jacksonville long term?
Yeah, I think he's like a Chuba Hubbard 2.0, quite frankly. I think he will carve out a role, but I don't think he'll ever amount to being like a top end starter in the league. He's probably going to be a career backup. He has the ability to carve out a role in the passing game, but Etienne, as long as he is there, also is going to be dominating those touches as well, because both very viable and passable. As pass protectors, I should say, and as pass catchers. As trying to spit that one out, Jesus Christ. But I do think I projected him to have a little bit larger of a role than what we're seeing currently. So the lack of touches is a bit concerning, of course, for the 2023 outlook. It has to be concerning from a dynasty perspective as well, just because if they've had this success with ETN, there's no reason for them to stray away from it, especially seeing they only spent a late third round pick on Tank Bigsby. So I'm just going to lean into the Chuba Hubbard comp here and say career backup, and I don't really have a lot of strong feelings either way towards him.
You seen this the same way, Josh?
Yeah, I'll keep this one super short. I think he's Travis Etienne's backup. Etienne's in Jacksonville next year. I think they're going to pick up his 5th-year option or extend him.
Yeah.
This is an upside handcuff. Maybe it becomes more of a committee like what Zach Charbonnet's done with Kenneth Walker. I think the problem here is that I think the talent gap between Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby is just simply a chasm at this point. So, I think I'm going to end up just being kind of below consensus on Bigsby throughout his career.
Kendre Miller, Saints running back, 3rd round pick, 71st overall out of TCU, 6 foot 220. He's fast for his size, guys. I think long term, he's more of a, once they move on from Alvin Kamara, his role increases. How do you see him, Billy?
I wasn't crazy about Kendre Miller. I actually didn't like the landing spot either. I think they drafted him out of concern for Alvin Kamara's suspension when they realized it wasn't going to be as damaging as they had maybe initially projected. I think they kind of just put him on the back burner. Came into the season with an injury. I should say even into the draft with an injury. And I think that long term, I think he's going to be the back here. And I think dynasty perspective, he's a great stash. 2023, not going to have a role. He's also playing behind Jamal Williams. And I think, 2024 and on, I think he'll start to get more involved, but I don't think it's going to be the level that people were hoping for out the gate, even in 2024. So got to like his size though. He's built well. I think he's got above average size and, consistent in production in college at least. And so I think that vision wise, when you watch film, he's got good vision, but again, another runner who runs a little bit more upright. It just kind of lacks the burst to get into gear, I think. So I do have some concerns from an NFL level, but I do think that long term he'll probably be, the 1B next year, and then potentially, start leading his team in carries.
Yeah, you see this any different, Josh?
I think Miller's someone that if you're going to trade for him in Dynasty, it should happen sometime next year because we see Kamara starting to tail off. If you actually look at Alvin Kamara's contract, if they cut him after this year, they get a $17 million dead cap hit. If they cut him after 2024, it's still a $10 million dead cap hit. I think Kamara is very likely going to be there for the next 2 years. So for me, I'm actually not super excited about Miller in Dynasty right now, just because Kamara's going to get the receiving work. And they still really like Kamara even in the red zone at the goal line. So we might just be looking at kind of like this crossing your fingers for a big play between the 20s type back. The Saints are an aging roster. Maybe they do cut Kamara and go, you know what, now it's time to tank. However, we've kind of been saying that for like 4 years now and it hasn't happened. So I think betting on the Saints to blow it up and be like, all right, young running back, it's your turn. I think this is probably the wrong team to do that with. I think what we're hoping for is that you're getting A.J. Dillon in Dynasty in terms of fantasy value, where you're getting a guy that's getting you like 10 to 12 carries each week, not even monopolizing goal line work, and then not much of a factor in the receiving game. So I think compared to the market, I've started to really sour on him just with how Kamara's looked this year. And when you dig into Kamara's really just not going to go anywhere for probably the next 2.5 seasons.
Dalton Cates, if you're listening to this wasn't meant to be a personal attack against your stance on Kendre Miller. My expert picks are on the site right now, the 33rdteam.com. I write up every game, give a score prediction, give you a synopsis on where I'm seeing how these things will play out. Then on Saturday, I update everything after the injury report comes out. I tackle survivor pool against the spread tournaments, winner pools. I've won 3 winner pool weeks this year myself, so I'm up pretty big on that. Check that out on Saturday mornings. Next up, gentlemen, Emari Demercado, undrafted out of TCU, 5'9", 215 pounds. He's 24 years old, which means he's older than all these other prospects. He's seen some pretty good workload in Arizona because James Conner's missed some time. I personally think it's more of we don't have anyone else, so this guy's been thrust into a bigger role than anyone would have ever anticipated. Does Demercado have any kind of future for you, Billy?
I think when James Conner's back, I think it's his backfield. We've seen Arizona lean into him pretty consistently. That being said, I think that Demercado has the job while he's gone and probably has earned himself as the number 2 moving forward, and will probably be mixed in. I don't think they'll go as heavy with Conner, but he'll definitely see the bulk of the touches, probably 50 to 55% of the rushing share on any given week, and Demercado will kind of take what's left from there. Dynasty value, I think this is a sell high. I don't think he's going to, be much higher than where he's at right now, unless they move on from Conner next year and don't draft anybody, but that's unlikely. They at least will add somebody in free agency if that is the case. So Demercado, I think, is kind of fallen in the right situation, right place, right time, and I think that's about what he's going to be.
I agree completely. Josh, for our listeners, you were nodding your head while Billy was speaking as well. You have anything to add on Demercado?
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. He's averaged 19 touches a game the last 2 weeks. Undrafted rookie on a team where when you look to the future, the 2024-2025 Cardinals are just going to look so different than they do right now. I think he's a sell in terms of the price. I think if you can get a 2024 third-round pick, I would take that in a heartbeat because that pick can be bundled with another pick. Now suddenly you turn it into a second round pick. I just think it's easier to bundle a pick like that. That's more ambiguous than Demercado a few weeks from now once Connor's back. So I think in Dynasty, if you have him, shop him right now for a third. I think you can get that deal done, and I would definitely prefer the pick.
Last running back that we're going to tackle, gentlemen. There can be a big divide between fantasy value and real life NFL value. I think Jaleel McLaughlin's one of those guys. That's a good example of that. Undrafted out of Youngstown State, 5'7", 187 pounds, which is very small. Workload's a concern there. 23 years old, so he's older than everyone but Demercado on this list. Probably can't hold up to significant volume because of his size, as mentioned, which is a problem in fantasy. That said, he's explosive, he's fast, he's a good football player, a steal for an undrafted free agent. Billy, what are you thinking about McLaughlin here?
Yeah, I liked his tape a lot. I mean, when someone is the first player in NCAA history to rush for over 2,000 yards in his first 2 seasons, you have to kind of hone in and watch that tape a little bit more deeply. I think he led all of NCAA with 2,400 rushing yards as well. And so very explosive coming out of college. And he's continued that explosiveness in the NFL level. I do think that he's explosive enough to where he should probably start taking on more workload out of Javonte. Javonte, though, has the draft capital attached to him. So I could see the hesitation there. But that being said, it's hard to keep someone like Jaleel McLaughlin off the field. I'd like to see them kind of phase out Pirine altogether and just be done with him. And once that happens, I think 2024, this is a more likely scenario, but McLaughlin probably carves himself out a larger workload. It's actually a little surprising he went undrafted, quite frankly. And I know, small school and everything, but I do think that I like him moving forward as a prospect, and I think he continues to have a role.
If I'm not an NFL general manager, obviously, but give me a late round running back with massive production any day of the week. Let's see what happens with him. If he fails, whatever, you can find hits here though, like you did with McLaughlin. Now, Josh, you live in Denver. You live in Broncos country. What do you think about McLaughlin long term here?
So I think one thing that's interesting is Billy talked about how it really seems like they should be giving McLaughlin more work. Javonte has been a bell cow the last 2 games. I think that's actually been a little surprising considering that McLaughlin's been by far the most efficient Denver running back on the ground by pretty much any metric you can find.
Yeah.
Russ has looked much better this year than last year. That's just been good for the overall fantasy points available in this offense. When you look at contracts, the Broncos can get out of the Samaje Perine contract after this year. It would save them $3 million. I think they're probably going to do that. I think it's going to be Javonte and McLaughlin. And when you think about it, Javonte is actually going to be on his 4th year, final year of his rookie deal. Next year does not feel like the type of running back they would franchise tag. Then again, the Broncos made a few head-scratching decisions recently, but I see Billy nodding his head. Yeah, it really doesn't feel like Javonte is gearing up for that one. One thing that I like is that McLaughlin's been targeted, 32% of his targets were screens. That's actually highest in the NFL among all running backs that are averaging more than a reception per game. So they're really, really manufacturing. They're trying to get the ball in the hands of this undrafted rookie. And I think that's a good sign. If he's been efficient and they're making concerted efforts to do that. The issue is the size. High watermark this year for carries, 9. High watermark this year for targets, 4. Only 1 game this year where he had more than 10 touches. He had 12 in that game. In terms of the true upside, I think he could have that Tariq Cohen season in him. I think we all remember that one year where Tariq Cohen made the Pro Bowl. He was a fantasy running back too. He actually wasn't getting massive volume at any point. He was just efficient and getting a lot of pass game work. So I think that's kind of the upside for a full season from McLaughlin. You could get a good fantasy production for a week or 2 here and there throughout his career where maybe the starter goes down and then you have a week or 2 where he's getting 15 to 20 touches. But I think for a full season, you're kind of hoping that he can kind of have, 10 to 12 touches that are very efficient per game. Ryan, you've been hosting. You've done a great job. Do you have any final thoughts on any of these backs before we close everything out?
I'm just glad you didn't bring any Tariq Cohen slander to the table. While he was overpaid, probably. I remember with Chase Daniel at quarterback. Actually, he played the Giants years ago, and he had like 150-yard receiving. And let's just say I made enough money where I can't hear any negative speak on Tariq Cohen.
Fair enough. Folks, that'll do it from us. Make sure that you're following Billy Muzio at FFMuzio on Twitter. He's the director of ops at Player Profiler. He's one of the industry's most accurate fantasy rankers. All of his work will be on PlayerProfiler.com. All of Theo Greminger's work, who we had last week on the show, is also on the site. Make sure you're checking out everything Player Profiler. Make sure you're checking out everything the 33rd team. Make sure you're checking out Ryan Reynolds at Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter for all of his content, my content on the 33rdteam.com. Folks, we just covered 10 rookie running backs in 40 minutes flat. From myself, Josh Larky, from the Associate Director of Fantasy and Betting, Ryan Reynolds, from the Director of Operations, Billy Muzio, from Player Profiler, from the 33rd team. Thank you, everyone,